I've always gone into the inquest hoping that I'll find out who killed my mother. I was hoping for honesty and truth from all the witnesses.
I absolutely don't accept that she has no knowledge of police corruption from that time.
But I feel like a few of the witnesses were frightened of repercussions. I don't want to know.
Because there's been so many lies. We thought, given the passage of time, that the people that may have once threatened them would no longer be relevant.
What did you see 42 years ago?
And yet we still saw great apprehension and fear.
I don't want to be in the paper.
Yeah, this is TV.
It's too dangerous.
What you saw that day?
It's too bloody dangerous.
Why is the inquest into the murder of Shirley Finn important? Because until this Shirley Finn case is resolved, it'll remain a stain on the West Australian Police.
In Western Australia, we have never really had a fair dinkum Royal Commission into police corruption. Shirley Finn's murder, it's the turning point in corruption in this state.
I remember the day quite clearly. I think it was about 9:30. It was raining. We were on our way to a pretty ordinary story, but I looked out the window and saw a police car parked alongside the golf course and stumbled across quite an amazing story.
The murder of Perth brothel Madam Shirley Finn in the 1970s is one of our state's high-profile unsolved crimes. There are long-held allegations members of the WA Police are responsible for her death.
Have you got any idea who killed Shirley Finn?
Not the slightest, no.
Did you kill Shirley Finn?
No.
Even former WA Premier Ray O'Connor was forced to publicly deny any involvement in the case.
The inquest's been going off and on for about 2 years. It's taken up way too many hours of our thoughts. But just maybe there's someone out there that can finally give Bridget that piece of information she's yearned for all these years, like what happened and why. That's kind of weird that we've looked so often and yet we haven't once actually got the spot where she was found.
Is it possible that they used to change?
I'm astounded by the effort that both Bridget and Juliet have put into this inquest and into the entire reinvestigation.
It was you that picked that bend up in the road, wasn't it? I didn't even pick that up.
I mean, the resources that Bridget and Juliet had were minuscule compared to the entire power of the state.
So this tree is quite distinct. Do you reckon that's that tree? I met Bridget in 2003. This one. I was a journalist at Channel 7.
I reckon these two trees.
At that time, there was numerous stories of police corruption. How could you attend a crime scene and not look in the boot? But the Shirley Finn murder was, for decades, the murder that everyone was talking about. I started looking more closely at the case. I started digging around and just speaking to people.
So they've all got all this money and it had to be laundered, and that's what Shirley Finn was doing, and that's what I was doing for her. And it was politicians' money and other prominent business people's money.
So she was actually laundering it for a number of key people?
Yes, very key people indeed, at the very top.
The more I learned about Shirley Finn, the more disturbed I became about the scale of the corruption in this story. It almost became an obsession. I just could not let it go.
I first met Shirley in the summer of 1958. Shirley was edgy, flamboyant, but she was extremely loyal, extremely loyal. Shirley had explained to me that she had been having family issues from the age of about 13.
Shirley, when she was around 14, had a sexual relationship with a much older boy. He was in his 20s. She was hauled before a magistrate and she went to work at the Catholic laundries. And this was an absolute pivotal turning point.
They had to wash laundry, dirty laundry. The idea was to cleanse their soul. I think it did the opposite.
She told me that the police had actually molested her, and she was very bitter about that. I think she wanted some stability, and she wanted someone to tell her that they loved her.
My mother had just turned 16 when she married my father, Des. She had Stephen when she was 16, Shane at 17 and me at 18. She was just an awesome mum to me.
Des was very aggressive and very loud, very intimidating. Shirley was looking for a way out of her situation. She wanted a better life for her children and herself.
Back in the 70s, Perth was a small town. Everybody knew each other. A lot of high rollers, and there was a lot of cash being splashed, and particularly in the brothel industry.
The police were given the powers to control prostitution. They could choose which girls were allowed to work as prostitutes. They told them where they worked.
Shirley took up the opportunity to set up a brothel and become part of the containment system.
When I met Shirley in the late 60s, her marriage was over and she had just opened up 316 William Street, which was going to be a brothel. Shirley told me that she was looked after by the police, who wanted their pay packet every week. It was a considerable amount, quite a few $100s. She used to go to the back of where we lived. There was an oval and a quiet little space, and she'd pull up in her car. I believe it was Bernie Johnson that would pull up alongside her. Bernie was the chap that looked after the containment policy. As she said one time, he crawls in like a mongrel dog and gets his pay packet, and then she'd come home.
When I learned what Shirley was doing for a living, I was shocked. And I said, Shirley, I don't understand how you can be working in this illegal business without coming to the attention of the police. And she said, the police know about it. I pay to stay in this business and I pay good money to them. I said, but Shirley, what sort of an impact will this have on your children? And she said, funny you should say that. She said, I have this reoccurring dream where I'm lying in the gutter and my 3 children are looking down on me. I said, it could become a reality, Shirley.
My mother split up with George and was living with a woman called Rose Black.
Rose was Shirley's de facto. They really loved the finer things in life. Shirley had been making enormous sums of money, but that all came to a big standstill. She owed more than $100,000 to the tax department, and the full payment of it would have put the one asset that she most prized at risk, and that's her family home.
Before I actually became a sex worker for Shirley, I was her driver. I knew who she was seeing, who she was going out with. Although Rose and Shirley were an item, Shirley was also having an affair with Ray O'Connor, the then police minister in the WA government. I used to drive them up to Kings Park. I used to take them to the Swan River, and we'd park there, and 9 times out of 10 they'd have a bottle of wine. They were having a great old time. But when Shirley got into trouble with the taxman, she went to him. I know she went to him and asked him for his help. And the conversation I heard between Shirley and Ray O'Connor was, if I go down, you go down.
She did not want to lose her house. And Shirley's strongest bargaining chip was the dirt that she had on people in town. Shirley was planning to name names at the tax hearing if she didn't get any help. I met with a woman who actually saw Shirley just days before the tax hearing.
Shirley, she came to the house to talk to my then partner. First thing she says, I'm gone. This time I'm gone. She said, I told Owen Leach, Assistant Commissioner of Police, that I'm meeting with the tax department on Tuesday and I'm not going to muck around. I'm going to name names. She said, Owen told me to shut my mouth. Watch what I said. Or bang, she went like that. But then Owen told her he's going to introduce her to an important person. I want you to dress really, really nice. Don't dress trashy. Dress to impress. This bloke going to help you.
On the Sunday night, 22nd of June, we had a barbecue about 6:30 with my mother and Rose. Probably about 8ish, Mum suggested that I have an early night. Apparently, my mother asked Rose to leave the house that night. She had an appointment to see somebody.
At 9:40, the neighbour's daughter was reversing down the driveway and saw Shirley in her driveway in a glittering gown carrying her purse. What happened next is unclear. We know she travelled to the Royal Perth Golf Club, and it's only a very short distance away from her home. And there she appeared to have met her killer, because by midnight she was dead.
We were the first news crew there. It was about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and we pulled up behind the police car. They were waiting for tarpaulins to arrive to cover the crime scene before they could continue their investigation. So I walked over. It was an American sedan. I walked around behind it and up to the driver's side and looked in and saw the body of a woman. And this magnificent gown she was wearing still sticks in my memory today. At the time, I never wondered how come I was allowed to walk around the crime scene. But later on, I realised it was a bit strange. You don't let anybody into a crime scene, a reporter or anybody else, but I was able to walk around.
I was in my first period, social studies it was, and the headmistress came in about 9:30 in the morning, asked for me, so I went out there and she wrapped her arms around me and she said, I don't know how you're going to live through this, Bridget.
Shirley was executed in what police said was a professional hit, 4 bullet wounds to the head at close range. It absolutely sent a terror wave through the community. It was very public and it was meant to send out a message.
I was so scared, and I said, I wonder if I go and talk to the police, if they're going to listen. But which one do I choose? Which one? are they all the same? And I said, no, I've got 2 kids. I've got to protect my children. And I can't go to anyone. I have to keep quiet.
The police investigation that followed seems to have failed to follow up on a number of key leads. Less than a year after the murder, the police handed the file on to the coroner, saying that there was no real prospect of the killer being found. I first came across the Shirley Finn story in 2002. I spent 3 years speaking to as many people as I possibly could. By 2005, I'd recorded over 30 different interviews and gathered extensive material. Ray O'Connor, take 2. I spoke with Ray O'Connor, who at the time was the Minister of Police. Of course, he later became Premier and then was jailed over a bribery scandal in WA Inc. It was alleged that he was having a relationship with Shirley Finn.
How do you feel about the ongoing rumour that you were involved with Shirley Finn?
It's a joke. See, I never ever met Shirley Finn.
You never ever met her?
No.
There's been some people that have said you had quite a close relationship with her.
Never met her.
Did you know Bernie Johnson?
Yes.
I spoke with Bernie Johnson, who was the vice squad detective that she was allegedly paying.
We were first on the scene.
Right.
Got the forensic people in, got the ballistic people in. I knew it was Shirley Finn's car, and I knew it was Shirley Finn.
What went through your head?
Not the same as went through hers.
By 2005, we'd gathered significant evidence and we handed it all to the coroner. We asked for an inquest, but we were refused.
I think it was Brian Eddy's evidence that changed things. He said that he saw my mother in the police canteen the night or 2 prior to the Sunday night. He then went to his superior and told him, and within the coming days he was knocked off his motorbike.
I was patrol officer. I was working day shift. I started work at 5, so it was dark. All of a sudden I hear a squeak of tyres and a roar of an engine. A car come in front of me and knocked the right-hand side of the motorcycle and sent me into the sand. Next minute, there's 4 blokes hop out of this car. One of them had a torch and one of them had a gun. And I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? I knew they were detectives. Anyway, the older fella of the 4 says to me, you want to see your kids again? You shut your mouth. You didn't see anything.
His revelations were explosive, and a short time later we were granted an inquest.
More than 4 decades after South Perth brothel madam Shirley Finn was shot dead.
The West Australian coroner will hold an inquest into the circumstances surrounding the murder.
We hope we can finally get to the bottom of it. There's a lot of people holding on to a lot of secrets. Going into the inquest, we had high hopes, but in the early days, there was quite a bit of frustration. We'd been waiting for decades to hear from former Vice Squad Detective Bernie Johnson, but we'd learned that he'd had dementia and wouldn't be giving evidence.
Were you disappointed about this?
You obviously looked quite upset at one point. Guys, we're not saying anything today.
It was hard going in the first few weeks. Witnesses saying different stories.
And one of the significant ones was that Neddy Smith had been sent in to shoot Shirley Finn.
A former police officer today told the court he had a tip-off that Neddy Smith had killed Miss Finn,
but then Inspector Don Hancock had told him to let it go.
Contract killer Nettie Smith is a convicted murderer currently in jail, but it appears there was no follow-up into the Nettie Smith lead. There were more questions arising than we were getting answers. But through it all, we did actually see a very common theme emerging in relation to police corruption.
Ms Finn had threatened to expose illicit dealings by politicians, businessmen and police.
The bagman said his job was to collect money from Perth's gambling venues and brothels every Friday. He believed it went to Vice Squad boss Bernie Johnson.
Ms Finn's dressmaker. He believes former head of the Vice Squad, Bernie Johnson, had the brothel owner killed, but is still too frightened to say why.
There was a lot of hearsay evidence, and almost every single witness was challenged. But I believe through it all, there was some very strong pictures emerging, particularly in relation to the payment of protection money to police by madams. Linda Watson appeared at the inquiry.
In 1979, before I went to open my brothel, I rang Vice Squad. They said, I have to go to the police station. 2 police officers were there, and I said, I want to open up a place. Do I meet the criteria? Oh, yes, we're happy for you to do that. But it's going to cost you $100 a week. And I went, $100 a week? Yeah, per girl. And I thought, shit, it's true. They're corrupt. Around this time, Bernie Johnson, he came to my home and he asked me about a police officer and he said, I want to take him down. This copper was a clean copper. And he said, if you don't help me take him down, you're never going to work in this town again. And you're going to end up... And he looked at my eyes and he bent down to the ear and he went, you're going to end up like Shirley Finn.
Are you sending them off to Matt?
Yeah.
Did you put all my questions
I put all of them. I didn't leave a one out. Ever since the inquest was called, we'd been waiting to hear from Shirley's de facto, Rose Black. Like I asked her about, does she know if there was any relationship between Shirley and Ray O'Connor? We had so many questions for her and we spent a lot of time preparing. Rose's evidence was quite remarkable.
Murdered Perth brothel madam Shirley Finn's ex-girlfriend has broken decades of silence. Telling an inquest into Ms Finn's death, she's feared for her life ever since.
Rose Black told the inquest that in the days prior to the murder, there was a meeting at the house and it was the bear that visited, and the bear was Bernie Johnson. The bear and my mum were counting out money out of a garbage bag and Rose was hiding in the cupboard.
I can only think of 3 cupboards it could be.
She didn't see the bear, but she could hear his voice.
I reckon they would have been in this room counting out the money because that's the nearest cupboard.
On the Sunday night that Shirley was murdered, Rose recounted that Shirley was very distressed and she was crying. She was very fearful because she was going to a meeting with the bear and a man from Sydney and that they were going to help her with a tax problem. Because she was so upset, Rose offered to hide in the boot for the meeting, but Shirley said she couldn't hide in the boot because that's where the cash was, the bags of cash. Rose presented direct evidence of who Shirley said she was meeting that night, and that put Bernie Johnson back squarely in the frame. As witnesses came forward to talk about what had gone on, it became very clear that the investigation, certainly back then in the day, was at the very least wanting.
The boot was never opened. I mean, we've got a murder investigation here. That boot should have been opened and examined.
I think even for its day, the handling of the crime scene was extraordinarily poor. One detective mentioned people trampling all over the crime scene.
The car was driven away when it shouldn't have been driven. It should have been towed away, I would have thought.
You can actually see one of the police officers sitting in the seat where the body's been removed from and driving the Dodge away. As well as lost opportunities at the crime scene, there was also key evidence that either wasn't obtained or it went missing. On the final day that witnesses gave evidence, we heard from a police officer who attended Shirley Finn's house. The day after the murder, he was a scene guard.
I arrived probably just a little after 11 o'clock. I went straight across to the house and I was led inside by a young fellow who was there. On the coffee table was a 2 stacks of photo albums. And when I looked at it, it was Shirley Finn out the back with her in a swimming pool area with Ray O'Connor. So I thought, oh, okay. So I had a look at a few more photos and recognised some senior police officers and some other politicians and that, and I thought, yeah. It was sort of a little bit of a shock to see them in there. What are they doing there, really? They're at a party. They're not there doing work.
Ray O'Connor has, when he was alive, claimed that he never knew a woman called Shirley Finn. He had never met a woman called Shirley Finn. So those photos would have exposed a lot of people.
The photo albums were apparently taken into evidence, but they cannot be found today.
So there's several 100,000 pages of material, as you know, Bridget, probably not much short of 1 million. The answer, if it's anywhere, will be in there somewhere, and we'll find it if it's there.
The inquest is almost over. All the evidence has been heard and we're just preparing final submissions.
I am. I'm really happy that this inquest has happened. That's what I wanted. But yeah, it's been so hard. So hard.
The inquest has generated a number of new leads and a number of suspects. Almost all of them were senior members of the WA police force, including Bernie Johnson and Don Hancock. Also, the former police minister and later Premier Ray O'Connor was named as a major suspect, and notorious hitman Neddy Smith. But there was one name certainly standing out above all others, and that was Bernie Johnson. But by the end of the inquest, he died. It was an enormous blow to Bridget and I.
The public had high hopes that this inquest would lead to a cleansing, I guess, of this stain, and that the police would say, well, look, we made mistakes in the past, some pretty bad people did some pretty bad things, and let's lay it all on the table and get it out there and move on. I'm not convinced that's happened. I think a full cold case review by a completely independent force that insists on immunity for witnesses who have something to say but feel guilty would bring the truth out.
I can move on from this. I can leave it alone, but it won't leave me alone. I'll always have someone popping up with some, I heard this, she knows that.
There are people that have stood up in that court that I know more about this murder and have chosen to withhold that information. I hope they develop a conscience.